Hi, welcome back. In this lecture, we will continue and we will finish styling home section. In last lecture, we applied CSS to these headings. In this lecture, we are going to style this P element, this button element and arrow down element, which is somewhere there. Okay, beneath these headings, I have this paragraph. Now I am going to apply CSS to this paragraph. For this paragraph, I have created a wrapper, this one, and the ID for this wrapper is home-text, and inside this wrapper I have P element. Let us apply some CSS to this P element. I am going to select the wrapper and the ID value for that wrapper is home-text. Okay, and inside this wrapper we have P element, so we can target it like this way, home-text, and inside this div we have P element. Okay, now I am going to set the color for this paragraph, and the color for this paragraph should be white. And now we have white color paragraph. Next I am going to set the font size, and the font size for this paragraph should be 17 pixels. And now you can see that there is large font for this paragraph. After that I am going to set the font weight. Right now it is too thick and I want to make it thin, and we can do it using CSS font weight property, and the value I am going to set is 100, and now it has thin font weight. Next, there is some default margin around this paragraph, and I am going to set some custom margin for this paragraph, and we can do it like this way. I am going to write CSS margin property, and I am going to define the top margin as 8 pixels, right margin 0 pixels, bottom margin 30 pixels, and left margin 0 pixels. By this way it is going to generate custom outside space for this P element. And now we can clearly see the paragraph beneath these headings. Let me increase the text for this paragraph. I'll just increase the dummy text. Okay, it looks fine. Perfect. Next, let us apply CSS to this button element. I am going to add comment for button elements. And the comment for button elements is just buttons. And we will write all CSS for solo buttons under this comment. I'm just creating some space inside style.css. Okay. For this home button, we added some custom classes. Let me show you. I'm going to index.html file, and this is the HTML markup for this button, and inside this div I have this anchor element, and I have attached some custom CSS classes to this anchor element. The first one is btn-general and the second is btn-home. This will be the general button class for all buttons on solo website, and this btn-home class is specific to this home button. Let us write CSS for these classes. First I am going to write CSS for this btn-general class. To create class in CSS, you write period sign and then you write name of the class, and the name of the class is btn-general, and then CSS goes inside these curly braces. Now I am going to define font for this btn-general class. I am going to write CSS font-family property. The font I have chosen for all the buttons is railway font, so I am going to define railway as a font for all the buttons. Next we need to define sans serif as an alternate font. Okay, now I am going to define border radius, and the value for this border radius property is 28 pixels, and it is going to create nice looking rounded shape for buttons, and you can see that there is rounded shape for this button element. Next, I am going to define the font size property. The font size for all the buttons should be 13 pixels. Nice. And we need to define CSS text transform property. And I want all the buttons to be in uppercase. Perfect. Next, we need to define some custom margins. I'm going to write CSS margin property, and I want to set the top and bottom with 0 value and left and right with 6 pixels. And we also need to define some internal spacing. As you know, by margins we define the external spacing, and by using paddings we define the internal spacing. We need to define some internal spacing for button elements. So I'm going to use CSS padding, and I'm going to set the top with 12 pixels, right with 46 pixels, and bottom with 12 pixels, and right with 46 pixels. And now we have nice looking button with some internal spacing. Okay, one last thing I want to add to this btn-general class is CSS transition property. I'm going to write CSS transition property, and the value for this CSS transition property is all, which means it is going to cover all the transitions, and the duration for all the transitions should be 0.5 seconds. The CSS transition property allows you to change property values smoothly. This is the duration of transition if there is any transition, and I am considering all the transitions. Later on we will add hover effect, and we want that hover effect to be smooth, which will take 0.5 seconds to change its color on hover. And let me make sure for browser vendor prefix for this transition property. I'm going to select this CSS transition property, and I'm going straight to edit menu, and on this menu I'm going to select this auto prefix selection, and it is going to add browser vendor prefix for this transition property. And you can see that it just added this WebKit browser vendor prefix for this transition property, and this vendor prefix is going to make sure that this transition property will work on all the WebKit based browsers. Okay, now we have our general button CSS on place, and this will be generic CSS for all the buttons. Next, we have to add CSS for this custom class, I mean this btn-home class. I'm going to write CSS for btn-home class. I'm going to write dot, and after that I'm going to write btn-home, and now we are going to write CSS for this btn-home class. This btn-home class is going to be specific for this button. Okay, for this button I want to set the text color, and the text color should be white. Now we have white color text for this button. Next, let me define a border for this button. I'm going to write CSS border property, and the value is 1 pixel border, and it should be solid with white color. And now we have nice border around this button, and it is 1 pixel solid with white color. Perfect. Next, we need to write CSS for the hover state of this button. I mean, when user mouse hover on this button, it should show the yellow background, and we will also change the color of text on mouse hover. And for that we are going to use CSS hover pseudo classes. I'm going to select btn-home class, and now I'm going to apply CSS hover pseudo class. The hover selector is used to select elements and apply CSS when you mouse over them, or you can say the hover CSS pseudo class is applied when an element has mouse over it. And after that I'm going to add CSS focus pseudo class. I'm going to select btn-home class, and now I'm going to apply CSS focus pseudo class. The focus selector is used to select the element that has focus, or you can say the focus CSS pseudo class is applied when an element has received focus. And we write CSS for these two states inside these curly braces. Now I'm going to set the color property on mouse hover. Right now the color is gray on mouse hover, and I want it to be white. So I'm going to define CSS color property, and the value is white. And now we have white color text on mouse over for this button element. Next, let me set the background color, and the background should be moon yellow color, and the hexacode for moon yellow color is F4C613. And now the background color for this button on mouse over is yellow color, and we also need to define the border on mouse over. Okay, I'm going to define border on mouse over, and the border should be 1 pixel solid with yellow color, and the hexa value for moon yellow color is F4C613. And now we have nice looking button for home section. Perfect. If you notice, the background color is changing very smoothly and it is taking 0.5 seconds. And this smooth transition is because of this CSS transition property. Okay, next we have to style one last element, which is this arrow down. Okay, we have it right here. I am going to write comment for arrow down. And the comment is arrow down, and we are going to write CSS for arrow down under this comment. The ID value for this arrow down is arrow-down. I'm going to select this anchor element with its ID. I'm going to write hash, and then I'm going to write arrow down. And we are going to write CSS for arrow down inside these curly braces. The very first thing I want to set for this arrow down element is CSS position property. I'm going to write CSS position property, and the value for this position property is absolute, and it is going to be positioned relative to this home section. Next, we need to define the dimensions for this position. First, I'm going to define the left dimension. I want this arrow down to be in the center of home section, so the value is 50%. By this way, you can see that it is in the center of home section. Next, I want this to be little bit up, and for that I am going to set the bottom dimension, and it should be little bit up with 20 pixels. And now you can see that it is exactly in the center of home section, and it is exactly at the bottom of home section. Nice. Next, let me set the color for this arrow down element, and the color value is white. And now we have white color arrow down, and now I am going to set the font size, and the font size for this arrow down should be 32 pixels. Nice. Next, we need to define the width and height for this, and the width is also 32 pixels and the height is also 32 pixels. So by this way, this arrow down element, which is actually anchor element, so by this way it gets proper width and height. And let me center align it. For that we are going to use CSS text align property, and it should be in the center, and now it is exactly in the center of this box. If you notice, the arrow down is not exactly in the center of home section. We still need to move this arrow down little bit towards left, and for that we can use CSS negative margins. I'm going to use a CSS negative margin, and we just need to define CSS margin left with negative values. I have to define margin left, and the value is negative 16 pixels, because if we divide 32 by 2 we get 16 pixels. So this is the exact number of pixels we need to move this arrow down towards left, and now it is exactly in the center of home section. If I remove it, you can see that it is right here, and if I put the negative margin again, you'll see it exactly in the center of home section. Without, it is here, and with negative margin it is here. Perfect. Okay, one last CSS I want to apply to this arrow down element is Z index, and the value for Z index is 1 because I want this arrow down element on the top of video element, and for that I'm going to use Z index as 1. Perfect. Next we need to apply CSS hover effect for this arrow down. I'm going to write CSS pseudo classes for hover and focus effects. First I'm going to select arrow down and I have to apply the CSS hover effect, and after that I have to apply the CSS focus effect like this way. On mouse over I want the color of this arrow down to be moon yellow, so I'm going to define the color property and it should be moon yellow, and the hexa value for moon yellow color is F4C613, and we have nice hover effect for this arrow down element. This arrow down will always stay in the center of home section. Perfect. Okay, now we have nice looking home section with preloader. This is the preloader. If you notice, the preloader is disappearing very fast. Let me make it slow. I'll go to script.js file. This is the code which we wrote for preloader, and I'm just going to fade out this preloader slowly just by passing slow value to this fade out method like this way. And now you can see that the preloader is fading out slowly. Okay, I'm going to close my browser window and I'm going to maximize my brackets code editor, and I have to beautify my code inside style.css. I'm going to select my code inside style.css and I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose beautify. Perfect. And I'm going to beautify my code inside index.html file, and I'm going to beautify my code inside script.js file. And we are done with home section. I'll go ahead, I'll save my project files. Okay, thank you very much for watching. If you have any confusion, please do let me know. I would be happy to help you. Thanks for your watching and I'll see you in next class.